Hello, I'm delighted to be here with Sweeney. We're in the lovely offices of the Newark University of London, where Emma teaches. And her book, Our Song at Dawn, just came out last week.
That's right.
I really enjoyed reading the book. It's, you know, and it's had such wonderful reviews already. And I would love it if you could summarise it for people, just so they can get an idea of what the book is about.
Sure. It's the story of Maeve Maloney, a 79-year-old woman who lives in Morecambe Bay. She spent her whole lifetime trying to fathom the secrets of her exuberant yet inexplicable twin. Her twin sister was full of joie de vivre, but she was diagnosed using the parlance of the time as severely subnormal. And so through the relationship between these twin sisters, I was really trying to look at the history of learning disability from the 1930s to the present day, and asking myself, what lessons have we learned from the past and what lessons might we still have to learn?
And that's certainly something that I wanted to ask you about, because Edie isn't the only person with learning difficulties in the book. There's Len and Steph, who live with Maeve in Seaview Lodge, or at least they at one point do live with her. So I definitely can see that you wanted to give voice to people with disabilities and learning difficulties. And I wondered what inspired you to do that, and how you went about achieving it, because I think it's very successful in the book, but it's obviously something that's not easy to achieve.
I started off wanting to write about disability right back 15 years ago, and that was because my sister has learning disabilities, and I felt that the books I read didn't really capture the kind of family life that I had experienced, and the kind of families that I'd seen in our community, the vast majority of whom embrace the different abilities of all their members and celebrate them. So I'd noticed that lots of books with disabled characters started with the disabled person being removed to an institution, or with the family breaking up because of the disability. And I felt that, excuse me, sorry. I felt that actually maybe part of the interest of a story might be how a family might fight to stay together, and what forces might be brought to bear on them, and what kind of pressures might be put on them to separate. So I used a lot of my own experience growing up with Lou. I also did a lot of research into the history of disability, particularly in the 30s to the 50s. And I did a project with a group of people who have learning disabilities in my local area. The Arts Council funded that project, and it resulted in this anthology, the Memoir Garden. And I'd intended for it to be prose, but actually when I listened to the voices of the people in the group who I ran creative writing workshops with and I recorded interviews with, I realised that they were speaking in a kind of poetry, and that sort of informed some of the way that I tried to capture Edie's voice in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting because Edie's voice is so full of that kind of lyrical, it is very lyrical, and it has a lot of remembered lyrics from songs. She's a brilliant singer. And it's full of a lot of repetition, the phrases that people say to her, and so there is a kind of poetry to it, I think.
Yeah, I actually ended up doing with my sister what I'd done with these guys at Sunnyside Rural Trust, where I did the poetry collection, and I just tried to really listen with the heart to the kinds of things that she was telling me, because in earlier drafts I realised what I'd been trying to do was kind of read the mind of someone like my sister, whose access to language is limited. And obviously that's, it's an impossible task of anyone.
In a sense, what Maeve is trying to do in the book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I was sort of committing the same error that she commits, which is to think that it might be possible to read people's minds, when in fact all we can do is try to do the best with the ways that people are trying to communicate with us. And when someone's language is limited, we might have to listen in new ways. And so I realised that with my sister Lou, her favourite phrases which she likes to repeat, and the lines from songs that she might include in and amongst her speech, might be trying to communicate something in and of themselves, and it might not require me as a writer to do anything more with it other than to order it, really.
Yes.
And to obviously transform it into something that's appropriate for a character born in the 30s in Morecambe who's had very different seminal life experiences from my sister.
I did particularly like Edie's phrase about, you know, who do you like best, which I think was very telling, but also makes me want to ask you about something else, which is partly how successfully I think the book ends up making you feel that we all have, you know, abilities and disabilities, regardless of whether those might be learning or not. And I think that in the end, that's really what the book asks us, you know, to ask ourselves, and also to ask of the twins, of Maeve and Edie, which one of those really did struggle the most, which did have the most disabilities in a way. And I think it's probably quite obvious where you might end up deciding on that one. But I wonder whether, as you give voice so beautifully to these characters, whether you feel that that's something that literature itself should be doing in general, should be giving voice to those who don't usually have a voice.
Yeah, I think in terms of the sort of who do you love the best and the different types of abilities the different characters have, there's a kind of love triangle in the novel that I think Edie possibly understands on an innate level in a way that Maeve's own kind of emotional armour prevents her from really fathoming. And I suppose that I think as a society we often are quite narrow in the things that we value. So we might value, you know, academic success or high status jobs, and yet of course we should be also valuing just as highly, if not more so, someone's capacity for happiness, someone's capacity to care for other people. At my launch party, my sister, Rebekah was there, so she'll know, was introducing everyone to each other, and you know, that's a great skill and one I'm quite envious of. So I suppose that through literature, I think we can encourage readers to think about what we value, and that one way of doing that is to try to give voice to characters who might have been silenced traditionally. So I'm not sure I think all books need to do that, but certainly any book I write, I think, will do that. Because, you know, it's just such a huge investment of time and creative and intellectual energy that for me, I can't imagine feeling motivated to spend all that time further amplifying a kind of voice that's already very loud. So for me, it feels like there's an ethical framework for writing, and I suppose all of us as writers have to ask ourselves those questions about what feels worthwhile for me. And for me, I suppose the thing that feels worthwhile is to try to shine light on something that has been wrongly suppressed.
Yeah, they're hard questions to ask yourself, I think. The other thing one of the many other things that I really loved about the book was how you managed to handle the plot. And there were so many different kind of narrative strains. There's a person from the past comes into Maeve's life in the present and kind of forces her to think about the past. So there is a kind of present storyline in which she is meeting him and thinking about the past. But then there's also what actually happened in the past. And then we have Edie's passages, and then there are also reports on the health of, you know, doctors' reports about Edie. There's, you know, there might be a report on the roof at Seaview Lodge. There's all these different kinds of things in the book, and you've managed to kind of organise them so that there's a real sense of excitement for the reader, you know, wanting to turn the page, find out what's happening, and it's really cleverly handled. And I wondered how you achieved it, whether that was something that just comes naturally to you, or whether that was something you really had to think about, and what tips you would give to those of us who would like to be better at handling that kind of plot management
You know, I have come across some writers for whom this comes naturally, and I certainly am not one of them, sadly. So I'm delighted that you think it does work, because a lot of time and effort and sweat and tears and went into that. I think the reason I was motivated to write the book in that way is to do with my interest in character, and I suppose a bit of a sort of world view of the way that we function in life. I don't think does necessarily happen in a neat kind of cause and consequence. So for me, I felt that we're not just living in one moment moving forwards. At the same time, we are living in our memories, and we might be experiencing two conflicting emotions at the same time. And how in a novel can we find a way to show that? So I tried to do that through having the past being as important as the present.
Yeah.
In some ways, more so really. So the past is narrated in the present tense, because it's actually more alive, I think, to Maeve than the present that she's living in. And I also felt the way in which we don't only have one voice, I think. We have so many voices, and not just voices that develop through time, but also voices that kind of clamour within us at one moment. So for Maeve, her sister's voice had become part of who she was, I think.
Yeah.
And she'd really absorbed that. Also, all these documents, these officious voices from the state, intimate voices from the past too. I think she'd kind of taken them within herself, and they'd become part of who her own character was. So I think that's why I write in that way, and why, although I would really, in some ways, love to think that I might write a chronological narrative in the future with one voice, I think it's unlikely to happen, because I just think it's probably not the way I see the world. And you asked for tips. That's hard. I think in terms of tips, for me, it's about just if you're going to write in this way, you probably just need to accept that unless you're a natural, that it will take a lot of redrafting, and that you might need to be prepared to be quite radical in your redraft. So I did lots and lots of structural revisions, and each time I read the novel again, and I summarised each scene with one line, and I colour-coded them depending on whether they were in the present or the past or ED or a document, and I put them all onto one big A3 piece of paper, so that I could kind of see it all at once, because I don't think our brains are really equipped to hold a whole novel in our minds, but anything we can do to help ourselves nearly get there, I think is useful. So that was how I did it.
That's very helpful. I'm sure there's something else I was going to ask you, but definitely one thing I do want to ask you is about what you're planning, or what you're doing now. So what are you working on?
So my friend and colleague Emily Midorikawa and I are writing a book called A Secret Sisterhood, and it's about the hidden literary friendships of Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot and Virginia Woolf. We became interested in this subject a few years ago, when we were just talking about how important our own friendship had been for us, because we actually became friends before we'd really started to seriously write, and so we've been together throughout the whole kind of writing journey, and we realised that we struggled to name the female writer friends of any of our favourite female authors. Of course, we could name lots of male writing friendships: Wordsworth and Coleridge, Byron and Shelley, Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and we felt kind of ashamed of ourselves really, that we had no idea if Jane Austen had a female writer friend. So we started to do some research into it, and we decided each month we would write a profile on a website which is called somethingrhymes.com, and through that process we discovered, of course, that all these female writers had female writer friends, unsurprisingly, but those friendships just hadn't been mythologized in the same way as the male friendships. So we started to ask ourselves why, and that's really at the root of the book. So that's coming out in autumn 2017, and I'm still hard at work writing that with Emily. And then I do have a new novel that is underway, I've done the research for it, and I've dipped my toe into the water with writing it. And actually totally by chance it has ended up bringing together my interest in disability, which is shown in Our Song at Dawn, and also my interest in female authorship in my next book, because through my research I ended up discovering that one of my favourite female writers had a sister who was diagnosed with imbecility, as they called it back then, and nowadays we would probably say that she had autism. So her family actually wrote her out of their history, and I did a lot of research and I found out a lot about her, and so I would like my next novel to be narrated by her.
You're not going to tell us who it is?
No.
Oh, that's great. It sounds very interesting. So you can look out for that in a few years' time, hopefully. But in the meantime, you can buy Our Song at Dawn and also Memoir Garden. So do that soon. And hopefully I'll be back in a couple of months with another author interview. But thank you so much, Emma. It's been a delight to talk to you.
Thank you so much.